Welcome to What's the Big Book Actually Saying? Step 4. Now, don't be fooled by the length of this video. There are going to be a number of Step 4 videos. We're not looking at the entire process, each inventory process in one video, but we're going to look at just what the nature of Step 4 is before we get into each of the inventories required. Let's get straight into it. Here's the formal description of the step: made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. That appears on page 59. What's interesting here is the three words: searching, fearless, and moral. They need unpacking. So let's go back into various other reference points throughout the big book about step 4. And what's interesting is for all of the steps, you'll find various descriptions of each step. We're not just stuck with the one description as they read on the wall or on page 59. And of course, beyond the description of a step is what's actually required, what the step's actually asking us to do. And that's way more important. In fact, the idea of each step is way more important than how they're written up. I actually find, for example, that the 12 and 12, and I refer to this section a little bit later in this presentation, the 12 and 12, the start of step 12 in the 12 and 12 book actually describes all 12 steps for me personally way better than the description of the steps formally on page 59 or on our banners. More detail and perhaps more commonplace descriptions of what they're actually asking us to do and think. Anyway, that's a personal thing. Here's the first reference from, guess what? There is a solution, because here's what it says. There is a solution. Almost none of us liked the self-searching, the levelling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings which the process requires for its successful consummation. The process, of course, is the solution. And there's quite a lot here to think about. And let's look at some other descriptions of step 4. Okay, almost none of us liked the what? The self-searching. Well, here's the word self added to searching, making more sense of the formal description. That's step 4, right? The levelling of our pride. Well, that's not just step 4. I would suggest that steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all about levelling our pride. Setting us up for step 10 and 11 and 12, where the pride levelling is maintained and continued and grown. The confession of our shortcomings, which is clearly steps 5, but equally step 9, because we don't confess our shortcomings once, do we? We confess, well, actually we confess it, to ourselves, to another person, then to God, which is all step 5. And I guess step 4, we're confessing to self. But step 9, it's when we confess it to the people we're making amends to. When we get to step 9, you'll see there's a concrete suggestion in the big book: confess your shortcomings to that person too. Anyway, more will be revealed. The point is, we are looking at a different description of step 4 here and other steps. And we need to be very clear about what is required for us to do at each step. Otherwise, we will not successfully consummate the solution. In other words, consummation is an old-fashioned word for get it done. And of course, we never completely finish the steps. But I guess the initial step work we need to get right. Anyway, let's look at some other descriptions of what step 4 is about. This is from the doctor's opinion, and it brings up a word that appears in the formal description. This is about a patient. The doctor is describing a patient. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology. Now, you'll read the same thing in the Carl Jung section of There is a Solution. I can't help you. This is beyond medical, psychological help. You need spiritual help. You need, in this case, moral psychology. And, of course, the word moral appears in our formal description. The word moral appears here too. This is from that section I was just describing, start of step 12 in the 12 and 12. It's a lot of 12s. Beginning with step 4, we commenced to search out the things in ourselves which had brought us to physical, moral, and spiritual bankruptcy. Okay, now what's interesting, how many descriptions of these things are. Sins, shortcomings, flaws, defects of character. It's all different language to describe exactly the same type of thing. Next, I haven't put the page reference in, from 63, 64 of the big book. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning. which many of us had never attempted. So hear the word personal house cleaning. What's really interesting about that is that the idea of writing out all of my resentments and fears and sex conduct elements, is it house cleaning, or am I not just looking at a dirty house? No. I'll be honest, when I did my step 4, or before I did, I thought it was just looking at all the dirtiness in my house, to keep this house analogy going. But no, what we're told is personal house cleaning, and this is in the step 4 section of the big book. So we're by doing the inventory as suggested, we're not just looking at all the crappy stuff, we're cleaning it. Very, very interesting distinction to make. Now, there's a couple of terms that really jump out. Number one is moral. The word moral appears all over big book AA writings around step 4. What is moral psychology? It's a thing. This is from Wikipedia, for what it's worth. And it's an interesting reading from the present day. It's field of study in both philosophy and psychology. Historically now, given this was written in 2022, or it's current now, probably we're going back to this relatively narrow description that historically the term meant, which was about moral development. Well, in terms of AA, moral development for me is recovery. And especially when you look at our traditions and our concepts and the approaches that are suggested to, manifest them. Trust me, our traditions and concepts are all about moral development, ethical development. But if we look at the broader term and skip down a bit, some of the main topics of the field are, and let's just tick these off for AA. Moral judgment, tick. Moral reasoning, yeah, we covered that, tick. Moral sensitivity, I think it's a lot about that. Moral responsibility, tick. Service keeps you sober. Moral motivation, moral identity, moral action, moral development, moral diversity, moral character, especially as related to virtue ethics, altruism, psychological egoism. They're 2 terms that come straight out of our big book. I think all of those versions of moral are inextricably linked to what we're being asked to do in our sober way of life. The way of life which the big book describes as indescribably wonderful. They are all aspects of recovery, very much so. Moral luck, maybe not so much. Moral forecasting, keep it in the day. Moral emotion, effective, we could go on. But, and I love the last one, moral disagreement. When you read Bill Wilson's Step 9 concept essay, and if you work in leadership or management, my suggestion is read it straight away. It's a killer essay. It talks a lot about how to disagree with others when there's something on the table morally. I would go so far as to say, when you look at this and you think about what we're doing in AA, our recovered way of life, it is moral psychology. And there's a lot of sense in the doctor's opinion that that's what we do. It may not feel that way to us as members, that's up to us, I guess, but from the outside looking in, Dr. Silkworth saw this as what we do to stay sober. Now, there's something else that jumps out with these 3 selected readings. Beginning with step 4, we commenced. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. There's a sense of, okay, I've just taken step 3. I've just decided that God can have my will in my life. Now I've got to get off my ass and do something. So if you're aware of members, it could be you. It's okay. But if, members who balk at doing step 4 after having taken step 3, my suggestion is they may need to look at how they took step 3 or whether they really have. Because the idea is, if you're willing to go to any length to get sober, to search for God, why wait? Why wouldn't you get off your ass as soon as possible, roll up your shirt sleeves and get cracking? Because it says, and I think the reason, like if it said, look at the formal description, fearless. Well, if I'm fearless, why would I wait? If I'm fearless about my moral inventory, which hopefully taking step 3 has given me a sense of, well, okay, I'm all in, I don't want to die. I am willing to go to any length. So even if I'm feeling fear, it ain't going to stop me because I'm willing to go to any length, and I needed to be to take step 3. Well, I've just taken step 3. Next, I must launch into a course of so-so action, vigorous action. There's a sense of imperative here. So, how do you know someone's really taken step 3? It's how they do step 4. I think it's as simple as that. Steps 1 to 3 have been preparing us for taking the kind of action any person can use to discover a connection with a higher power, our solution for active alcoholism. Why wait? It's only your life you're putting at risk if you do. How do we do it? Well, let's look at this marvellous analogy of the commercial inventory. We would now call that stock take. Taking a commercial inventory, in other words, a stock take, at a retail store or a manufacturing environment, an office environment with the stationery, whatever. It's a fact-finding and fact-facing process. Let's stop and think about that. We're not looking at our psychology. We're not looking at how what we did made us feel. None of that is relevant. What we're looking at is the facts. Actually, I lie. It is relevant how we felt, not how we feel. So, when I do inventory, and we'll look at this in the next video for resentments, I need to inventory what I felt at the time. And it's probably there in the why. Why did I resent my mother? Here's why. But the idea is, in the present day, I'm just looking at the facts. What happened then? There's an element of dispassion, or at least objectivity, in how one takes a commercial inventory. Face the fact, record the fact. It is an effort to discover the truth about stock in trade. Well, what is stock in trade? What we're currently selling. All right. And so, even though we inventory stuff from our childhood up to the present day, the reality is they're all just variations of a theme that is probably still in stock, something we're still selling to others in our doing, in our saying, in our thinking. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods. In other words, stuff that's not selling, stuff that others don't want or like. So this retail, this commercial analogy is really strong. I'm not looking in the stuff that I do that works for me and others, that is helpful, that is productive and useful. No, I'm looking at all the stuff that is unproductive and unuseful. And I'm using a process to work out what that stuff is. Resentments and fears and sex conduct being 3 major ways to look at my unsaleable, damaged goods, the stuff that doesn't work for me and others. And why do we do that? To get rid of them promptly and without regret. I think promptly makes sense, but without regret, that's a very easy thing to miss in the big book, that when we hand over our defects of character later on at step 7, and we're not going to talk about that too much here because we're only at step 4, but we're leading up to handing this stuff over, all of these unsaleable goods, we can't regret it. If we regret handing over a defective character, which to me is about admitting this is a defective character, God, it's of no use to others, therefore of no use to me. Can you please do something with it? Because I don't want it. As opposed to, I regret giving you this. I really want to hang on to it. Greed works for me. Lust works for me. You can't really do that, you're right? It's like a retail stock take, going back to the analogy. Why would I keep trying to sell stuff that doesn't sell? Whack it in the discount bin and let it go. In fact, whenever I go to a retailer and they've got that discount bin, 50% off or whatever it is, I always think about step 4. And think about what all that stuff there, that's their character defects expressed as stuff they should never have bought off the wholesaler in the first place. Anyway, I must continue. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he, she, or they cannot fool themselves about values. And that's the point. If I'm a good retailer, every time I shut up shop, if I walk out from front of the store, I walk past that 50 to 70% off discount bin and I will look at it and go, what was I thinking? I cannot kid myself. That stuff was never going to sell. And that's exactly how we're encouraged to look at our defects of character, our shortcomings, our flaws. If they ain't working for other people, they're probably not working for us, they're not useful, consign them to the discount bin. And how do I know that's what the big book is saying? Because they break away from the analogy to make the critical point. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We are literally at step 4 being asked to carry out the mindset and basic activities of a retailer doing a commercial stock take in their back of house and front of house. And I think we can't escape that. Therefore, step 4 is not therapy. It is not navel-gazing. It is not shame-producing self-reflection. It is not for God's sake, journaling. It is a very set, structured process. It's about looking at our unuseful thoughts, feelings, and actions, those that seem damaged and unsaleable to others. You keep selling them at people and they're going, I don't like that. Okay, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. We've already read that in the big book. How? How do we do this work? I've written stock take training for Coles supermarkets in a previous job quite some time ago, but I'm sure it's still relevant. One of the things you train when you train people to do a stock take is mindset. And the mindset, given it's just counting, long hours of counting, it's about being unemotional, dispassionate, or at least objective, okay? You do it unemotionally, dispassionately, objectively. Let's go back to the formal description. Searchingly, fearlessly, exactly like a commercial stock take. I say to my sponsees, if they start to feel too much anxiety or even a little amount of anxiety or fear, stop. Look at what the description of step 4 is. It's meant to be fearless. So if you feel fear, you can no longer complete the task. Then they'll go, well, how do I not feel fear? When I do inventory, and the first thing I say is, well, make sure that you're not feeling shame or ego instead of fear. Make sure it's fear that you're feeling, because often it's shame. Stuff comes up. Totally get that. And they'll go, okay, fair enough, but okay, what if I am still feeling anxious? Well, this is what I suggest, and it's just what I suggest. It's not conference approved. Pick the time of day where you're most positive. If you're a morning person, never do inventory at any other time than when you're high energy and as positive as possible. Next, don't do it for too long. Don't max out your normal attention span for tasking anything, let alone an unlikable task, potentially. Do it in short bursts at that high energy time. I always suggest do it in public. It's a weird one, but I got drunk a lot in solitude towards the end of my drinking with the blind shut and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes my sponsees will say, well, that's how I do inventory alone. No, hang on. Do it in public. Just wherever you drank or whatever you drank, like, do your inventory in the opposite environment. I like doing it around people because I feel a little bit more connected to my solution and the future rather than my past, which was very isolated in my case. That's just all stuff that I suggest. Take it as read. All of this stuff is monkey bars. Play around as you like, not with the suggestions from the big book, but anything I add. We're nearly there. We're looking at this next reading from page 64. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what defeated us, we consider its common manifestations. Now, what's interesting about that as we move into the first inventory being resentment, we're reminded one more time of something. One final reminder that we've already considered self-centeredness as a critical problem for us at step 3. So when we read this at step 4, being convinced, of course, we can't do step 4 until we've taken step 3, and we can't take step 3 until we're convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what defeated us. All we're doing is just moving that along. This is just the next stage in the process of ridding ourselves of it. There's a bit of resentment going on with my 2 cats there, you probably just heard. Step 4 asks us to start proving that commitment. Are we just taking step 3 in some honorary way, or are we fair income? Are we all in? Are we ready to look at self? Because, hey, we just confessed it was a big problem. Let's start looking at it, specifically through a very strict process, a number of gates that make it safe, objective, and just like a retail stock take. And on that rather pragmatic note, I'll see you, if you wish to be there, for the next step 4 video on the specifics surrounding resentments inventory. Have a happy sober day.